Do the ends justify the means? If a tree catches fire in the forest and no one's around, did it combust from natural causes? Why is the sky blue? Every look through the prism provides a new answer. Welcome to the Prism on the Voice of Russia. I'm Andrew Hiller. Today we gaze through the crystal to look at a treatment that could prevent Alzheimer's, cerebral palsy, and Parkinson's. Examine what a wishbone meant to the ancient Maya, why trees might be polluting the air, but first, we take a trip to the moon. You are entering the world of the prism. This look through the prism may have only required a small step, but it changed how we view the world forever. Neil Armstrong, test pilot, astronaut, goodwill ambassador to science, died this week, but his legacy will live forever through the moonwalk and all his exploits. Joining us to relive some of those adventures and times is Dr. Alan Needo, the curator of the Apollo program for the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. Welcome, Dr. Needo.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, who was Neil Armstrong?
Neil Armstrong was a Midwestern young man born in 1930 in a period in which technology was beginning to seem like sort of a path to the future to make things better. He's a young boy in Ohio, became interested in flight. This is the 1930s. By 1936, he had actually taken an airplane flight, became fascinated. He was a little bit too young to be drafted into the Second World War, but at the end of the war, he decided that aviation was sort of a thing for a career and arranged for a college education to be paid for if he would agree to spend some time as a naval aviator working with the Navy.
Now, one of the things I often say on the Prism is that today we live in the land of science fiction, and it's remarkable the things that we are achieving today that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we thought was absolute fiction. This may have been even more the case for Neil Armstrong, and especially the first man on the moon.
Yeah, the trajectory of aviation, of aerospace technology from the 1930s when he first became aware of it for just some 40 years after that to be walking on the moon is breathtaking.
When I think about what Neil Armstrong did, both as a test pilot as an astronaut, I think he must have been a very brave and courageous fellow. But I also think there's got to be a certain degree of crazy to agree to be the first person to be sent off into space, not knowing if you can really make it back. Was there that sense of daring do or that sense of lunacy that attached?
No, I think to really understand this cohort of men, and they were mostly men, they didn't think that way, that they got involved as sort of engineers and technicians with very specific jobs and tasks. And they didn't think of it in terms of crazy or volunteering, is that they were involved in an operation. They trusted one another. They trusted their management. They trusted the technology. And I don't think it ever crossed their minds that when they had a meeting and he was told that he would be the commander of the Apollo 11 flight. First of all, it wasn't absolutely certain that that would be the first landing flight, but it very quickly became obvious that unless something went wrong, it would be. I don't think it ever crossed his mind that, my goodness, this might be crazy. I need to back out or consider backing out. He was just deeply involved in doing a job. I don't think it ever crossed his mind once it became clear he would be the first man up there.
And let's talk about the Apollo missions. Clearly, they were seminal moments in our culture, and in fact, the world culture. Now, the interesting thing to me about that is usually when we think about those moments, we think about, for example, the Kennedy moment. Everyone knows where they were when Kennedy was shot, or Pearl Harbor, or 9/11, or Chernobyl. Most of the time, these moments that everyone knows where they were are a negative thing. It's fairly rare. Maybe the first time the street lamps went on with electricity. It's fairly rare that there's this great moment of shared identity and wonder, which is positive. What was that Apollo moment really like for America and for the world?
Boy, you know, that's an interesting observation. I can think of a few other positive ones, I suppose. Lindbergh in the late 20s, and then VE Day or VJ Day here in America, but I'm sure in Russia also the announcement of the war being over would be one. But I think that you're right, that in a very real sense, this was a very contentious time in the world, that there was a conflict of all sorts. And the idea that there would be an operation and an event which realistically or theoretically was an accomplishment of mankind rather than just simply an accomplishment of one nation or even one company or one person was something that the world was primed to experience at that point. I think it gave a respite from the conflict, which was so pervasive at the same time.
And that actually was one of the things which both Neil Armstrong and his fellow astronauts were perfectly suited for, because somehow they made it not about them. They were gracious, they were humble, and they were able to share the moment and make it a moment for all of us.
You know, this aspect of internationalism or sort of humanity versus, specific claim pervades some of the history of aviation. Even in the early days, the first around-the-world flights, all of the pilots like Howard Hughes and others all remarked how much camaraderie there was between the engineers and the scientists in the various countries who are working toward sort of a human goal. The general aspects or the human aspects of the accomplishment have always served as a potential, not always one that's been realized, but a potential bridge between differences. And I think that we came in peace for all mankind, which is written on the plaque that's on the lunar module, that something about science and technology gives it the opportunity, not always realized, to supersede differences.
Which brings us to the question of legacy. I think one of the chief legacies is the idea of possibility. Landing on the moon and being able to do this meant anything under the sun could be achievable. But what was the legacy of both Apollo and Armstrong?
Well, I think that this, human superseding differences is one, that Armstrong left a memorial for all of the astronauts who previously had perished in this attempt to achieve such dreams. So I think the possibility of superseding conflict is one legacy. Another legacy is some notion that organizations as complicated as governments and industry can in fact manage their complexities in order to actually accomplish something at a time of cynicism and belief that government is the problem and not the solution, or that only sort of individual desires or profit or something can really lead to accomplishment. I think that feeling that we can actually work in big, complicated groups and actually get something done on a reasonable schedule is something that is inspiring.
Looking through the prism at a giant leap for mankind, I'm Andrew Hiller, and I was joined by Dr. Alan Needo, who is the curator of the Apollo program for the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum. Thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Oh, thank you.
For the Voice of Russia, I'm Andrew Hiller.